So I'm going to turn it over now to David Weissmann. First of all, David's talk is presented tonight, sponsored tonight by Kim and Dan Cohn, Stan Firestone, and Anonymous, who is the brother of Anonymous, who sponsored Rabbi Nathaniel Friedman earlier, and Jack Hillman, Mark and Rita Lohr, Adrian Litt, and the Weissmann family, who made a very generous donation in honor of their husband and father and his presentation this evening. So I want to say of all the rabbis that have made presentations tonight and yesterday, there are some that we take particular pride in. So last night at this hour, we had Harold Schroeder, who gave us a part of his regular session. And tonight we have David Weissmann. And we're particularly proud. And I was very, very excited when I asked both Harold and David to teach tonight, along with all the other rabbis and teachers from around the city, because we have watched them grow in their Torah learning and their serious approach to Torah learning. And David has really worked on this session. And David has really worked on his Torah learning in general in many, many areas. And he learns in a very serious way. And we've been chavrusas for years, and I've watched all this happen. We have a tremendous amount of pleasure and joy in being able to present David as a presenter tonight. So one of the first things I'm going to do is I have to find David here, and I'm going to, first of all, I'm going to make him a co-host. So now David has the ability to share his screen. That's the one thing. And the other thing I'm going to do for David is I'm going to put the spotlight on you. And David wants the spotlight. There's Elena's here. Okay, that's great. I saw Shira checked in a little while ago. Okay, so everyone's coming on in, which is great. Good to see the whole family here. And when I put the spotlight on David, it is all yours, and take it away.
Here we are. I feel like we're on PBS, where, you wish they would stop with that donation stuff and get back to the music. So thank you, Rabbi Friedman, for that very, very kind endorsement, and Rabbi Silverman, my good friend. All the speakers always talk about how their wives are behind everything they do. Well, in my case, let's move over here. Nancy is actually really behind me. And she's going to kill me for this. So I'm going to need a place to sleep when this is over.
Yes, I am.
Has any COVID-free zone. So I'm going to just take this down. Always good to start off with a little bit of levity. This is a very serious topic, actually. I'm going to try to share my screen now. And let's see if that works. Let's share this one. All right. Can you see it? Rabbi Friedman, do you see the screen?
I see it.
Okay. You see me still?
No, I just see the screen.
Whoa.
We haven't been able to see the speakers and the screen.
I can see the speaker and the screen.
Well, if you can do that, that's great. We haven't been doing that too much.
Oh, I can see the speaker and the screen.
Wow.
Okay, very good. I cannot see right now. I can't see very much. So. All right, so let me explain what we're looking at. My topic tonight is counting to 50, beyond measure to infinity at the speed of light. And this is really a fascinating topic. Rabbi Friedman asked me to speak, and he said, what will you talk about? This came right to my mind because we're in the middle of counting to 50. In fact, we're almost at the end of counting to 50. Incidentally, Friday is my English birthday, and I'm more than 50. I am also beyond measure. But what we're looking at are two pictures. And these are descriptive pictures that we're going to spend some time talking about tonight. This one, do you see my mouse, everyone?
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Okay. I made it very big. I really wish I could change the view here 1 second. I don't know what is wrong with this. Let's see if I hit escape, what happens. Reading controls. It's just not working. Maybe Nancy knows how to do it. Okay, we're good. All right. Now, on the left, what you see are a pile of coins, and this is going to come up in the Gemara that we're going to look at in just a second. On the right, this is a famous diagram. It's called in the Kabbalistic tree. And these are the Sephiros. Each have different names: Keter, Bina, Chachma, Gevurah, Chesed, Tifiras, Hod, Netzach, Yisod. So you count these. You see these in your prayer book every day when you're counting. You also see them in the morning prayer when we get to King David and he asks God to, are all of these things available? And they're also interesting in another way. You're going to find that the coins here are going to represent a certain way of looking at the world, which we'll call it a deterministic way of looking at the world. Things are fixed, they're counted, they are measured. This is Albert Einstein's favorite approach. Aristotle had that approach. Maybe you call it Spock. Spock had the same approach. On the right side, we see something that's at a different level. Let's call it more than measure, higher than measure. It's an indeterminate approach. This is more of the approach of Niels Bohr, who came up with another theory. We'll get to him in just a minute. Or like Plato, or we might say Captain Kirk. Either way, you get the dichotomy. One is fixed and one is unlimited, let's call it. Now, this is a famous picture. On the left is Albert Einstein, and on the right is Niels Bohr. These were both Jewish men, at least technically. We know Einstein was Jewish, obviously. Niels Bohr's mother was Jewish. Her name was Ellen Adler, and she was from a wealthy, aristocratic Danish family. I don't know what his upbringing was. I doubt he had a whole lot of connection, but he must have had some. So here's Einstein on the left, and he says, I, at any rate, am convinced that God, does not throw dice. You've heard that statement, God does not throw dice. What does that mean? God doesn't do things with probabilities or randomly. God decides exactly what it's going to do, and the world is running around in a deterministic way. And Niels Bohr says, Einstein, stop telling God what to do. Wait a second. At least there's an admission of something else going on there. Einstein also said, I'd like to believe that the moon is there when I'm not looking at it. Another very famous statement. We're going to sort of delve into these ideas, but from a Torah approach, and you'll see that there is. Well, let me give you an overview, and let me explain what our learning objectives are, and then let's see if we accomplish our goal at the end. We know from the Torah that it's really not a desirable thing to count. When we count, we are limiting. We don't count a census, we count the shekels. We don't count the people because the Jewish people are beyond measure. We're like the stars in heaven, or like the seas in the sand, which we'll come back to also. If it's true that we're not supposed to count, then why are we counting 50 days? It would seem that that's counterintuitive. Counting is not desirable, but yet we're told to count this period of time specifically. So that's the dichotomy. But we have some objectives. We want to understand the concept of counting and measuring from a Torah perspective. We'd like to learn how the halacha, in fact, reflects a deeper understanding of reality. And we will also see in the process that Torah ideals are not divorced from physical reality or scientific understanding, but in fact, they are reflected in nature. And maybe it's the nature that reflects the Torah, as opposed to being the other way around. Some terms that we may throw about, and maybe we should keep these in mind as we go forward. One word is measure, or we use the word midah in Hebrew. Chamishim, chumashim, 50, which is what we're counting to. Bina, that was up here on the Kabbalistic tree. Chachma, which is right next to it. Michael Snow has entered the waiting room. Hello, Mr. Snow. Sphirot, which are those little those things on the diagram back there. Let me go back. All of these are called spheros. We'll describe those a little bit. And then from the other side, special relativity, superposition, locality, entanglement, scientific terms. Enough of that. Let's get into the Torah. What I've done is I brought for you all of our sources, except for a couple. One was too much to print, and I'll tell you another one orally. This is from Vayikra, and we'll just read it. It says, you shall count from the next day after the Sabbath, which we have learned is after the Passover. Our holidays are like Sabbaths. From the day that you brought the sheaf of the wave offering, 7 Sabbaths shall be complete, 7 weeks, or maybe you got to have 7 Sabbaths. To the next day after the 7th Sabbath, you shall count 50 days, and you shall offer a new meal offering. So we count the Sabbath weeks and days, 7 weeks and 50 days. 7 weeks is 49 days. Do we count 50? The language in the verse says explicitly, let's look, ad mimachar hashabbat, until the next day after the 7th Sabbath. It's like until but not. Let's get to that point, but maybe you shouldn't count it. It's interesting also, the Torah was given on the 6th of Sivan, or was it the 7th of Sivan? There's a debate. It's like in between the weekday and Sabbath. There's something ethereal about the giving of the Torah. It's a little bit unknown or not physical, more than a little bit not physical. In fact, some commentators say that we actually count from the very first day, from the Sabbath, and it's included in the 50 days. That's not really where we fall out, but it's fascinating that, and it will come back. We'll come back to that idea that maybe there is something significant about that first Passover day that resonates through the rest of the count. And this is from the Shulchan Aruch. So here we go, straight from the Torah to the Shulchan Aruch. And this is what, this is the law of counting. Here's how we count. And again, I've got it there for you, and I'm happy to send to anyone after this all of these materials. They're available for you at Safari Online or in many different places. But let me just read it and paraphrase it perhaps. On the second night after the Marav prayer, we begin to count the Omer. And if someone forgot to count, he can still count but he can't. But if he misses a night, he can't say a blessing anymore. Very fascinating. He should count the days and weeks. How? On the first day, he should say today is day 1 of the Omer till he arrives to 7 days. And then he says it's 1 week of the Omer. And then he counts on the 8th day, it's 1 day and 8 days and 1 week and 1 day. So we're counting weeks and days. So we see from this, it's very important not just to count the day, but to know which week you're on. So we're looking at cycles of 7, and we want to keep that in mind, why we're counting cycles of 7 as we attempt to demystify what's going on here. And we're counting days. Fascinating. It's like 2 wheels going at one time. Now we're gonna turn the page, and we're gonna have a discussion about counting. And anyone who's been through Bava Metzia, and I think that this appears somewhere else in the Gemara too. I'm not that good. And I brought this down for you so you can all see it. And just so you know, I did take these translations from Sefaria. Thank you, Sefaria. On the right side, you see the Gemara in the English translation. And on the left side, these are the Rashis. And this is elucidated in the Metifta. And I want to go over the Gemara here and the Rashis, because they're so insightful into the rabbi's amazing ability to describe physical reality in a way that there was no way that the scientists had caught up with them yet. That's fascinating, because whenever this was redacted, it was well before we had even the inklings of Francis Bacon and the scientific revolution that led to electromagnetism, Einstein and Bohr and quantum mechanics and all those things that are, the rage in science today. So let's look at the Gemara. It says, Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, Eina bracha mitzuya ela b'davar hasamui min ha'ayin. Rabbi Yitzchak says, there is no blessing found in something that is not concealed or covered from the eye. Shenemar, as it says in Devarim, Yitzav Hashem itcha et habracha b'asamecha. God commanded you the blessing in your storehouses. Or is it plural? Let's see. In your storehouses, it's plural. And the word, let's look at the word in Hebrew. You can see my big mouse there. B'asamecha. And the root of this word looks like samui, which means concealed or latent or covered. And we're going to come back to that in a second. I want to continue. Rabbi Yishmael, Ein habracha mitzuya ela b'davar she'ein ha'ayin shel let it go. There is no blessing in something that the eye has no, the blessing is found only in a matter which the eye has no dominion over. It's interesting. It focuses on the eye either being concealed from the eye or the eye having dominion over. It's going to be fascinating how this plays out. And the next part of the Gemara is even more exact because we're not sure, where are we in this calculation? We're talking about the eye, but this is even more specific. I just want to read the English here. The sages taught one who goes to measure, and that's the word here, lamod, because we're going to come back to measure, the grain on his threshing floor recites, may it be your will, Lord our God, that you send blessing, shatishlach bracha, b'masei yadenu, with the work of our hands. So he hasn't seen anything yet. He's about to go count. He says, God, please send a blessing. If he began to measure, he's already started. He says, blessed is the one who sends blessing upon this pile. So he's hoping it's still coming. Maybe it's not. If one measured and afterwards reciting the blessing, this is a vain prayer. This is forbidden. You're like taking God's name in vain. If you've already counted, can't even say the blessing. Because no blessing is found neither in a matter that is weighed, a matter that is measured, a matter that is counted, rather in a matter concealed from the eye. The Lord will command blessing on you. Again, same verse, that is in your storehouses. So let's look at that. We've sort of brought it out. I think you can see where this is going, that there's something interesting about our observation or our measuring that takes away blessing. So here's Rashi. Ein habracha, there's no blessing. Bracha hayenu shadavar mitbarach mitraba me'alav. The thing is blessed or it increases of itself. And you can see, this is a French word. I don't know what that means, but they brought down in the Masifta, in French, it means shefa. Now, shefa is a loaded word in Kabbalistic terms. Shefa is an influence. It's a divine influence, or it's an influence from a higher reality that we call spiritual. Let's just call it another dimension. Let's demystify it. Let's just say it's from a non-physical area that comes down to the physical area. And then he comments on biasamecha, which is what we said, in your storehouses. What does that mean? Lashon davar hasamui min ha'ayin. It's hidden from the eye, from the root that I mentioned before, asamecha. And then another possible, she'ein ha'ayin sholetet bo, the eye has no dominion in it, as it says, biasamecha, milashon nigazin, hidden, where we take our Torah scrolls to the Geniza. We put it away, hidden it away, store it away. There's a debate, actually, two interpretations. Rabbi Yitzchak is saying that if it's covered from the eye, from Samui, and Rabbi Yishmael, it says if the eye doesn't have dominion over it, meaning if it's in the storehouse, you obviously can't see it. It's hidden away somewhere, so the eye can't get into it. So really, they come out in the same way. But the idea also, I want you to remember, is it's not necessarily just that the eye can't see it, but it's neither been counted, weighed in any which way. How would you count something without the eye seeing it? Maybe you've got a mechanical device. It weighs it automatically in the storehouse, and you know how many pounds you have. You now, and of course, you will read the reading. You'll see how much is counted, but you understand that it's now part of your reality. You've counted it. I think that Gemara is very specific and doesn't leave a whole lot of room for wiggle there. Now, I'm going to just spend a few minutes, and I don't really, this is a lecture with regard to Torah, but there is a little background in science or physics. Most of you have some background in it, and it's all available online really tremendously. And in fact, I sent my family an article I happened to run across just the other day. It's in Forbes magazine about this concept here that I'm going to try to elucidate for you. And what I want you to understand is I'm going to describe to you physical reality that is counterintuitive. It doesn't make sense to you what I'm about to tell you, but what I'm telling you is true. And in fact, this is the most successful scientific theory ever, quantum mechanics, and it is responsible for things like transistors, MRI machines, light-emitting diodes, USB drives. Many, many things have come out of quantum mechanics that are amazing. And so I want to describe to you two things. One is the famous double slit experiment, and the other is what's called particle entanglement, just to prove my point that the counting or observing is significant in terms of physical reality. And it really echoes what the Gemara just told us. I have some key terms here: wave-particle duality. Now, what this means is that particles, which we are used to thinking of, here's particles, as electrons or photons, atoms, even molecules, have a location, or originally you might say you could measure their momentum and their location and find out exactly where they are. That turns out to be not necessarily or not exactly true at all. In fact, it turns out that particles, until they are measured, only have the property of a wave, like a water wave. You put two waves together, they cancel each other out. Just like here on this, you'll see a wave going through two slits, and they go through in two different waveforms, and they cancel each other out and they augment each other. And if you were to put that on this glass right here, you would see a pattern that looks like waves. This is the classic wave pattern. But it turns out that if you were to observe each electron one at a time, or each photon, and observe which slit it goes through, literally with a measuring device to determine which slit it went through, you will find that the wave pattern disappears and you get a particle pattern of two different spots of a collection of spots coming through this side and coming through this side. It doesn't seem, how is that possible? It seems completely counterintuitive. This is the famous Schrodinger equation, which describes the wave function of a particle before it's measured, the probability that a particle may be found in a certain location or with a certain velocity. And this is what's used to create those many different things that we've talked about. This is reality. The particle doesn't exist in a fixed location until it is measured or observed. And there's a debate among scientists: does it have to have a conscious observer? You saw from the Gemara, it doesn't seem to matter if we have a conscious observer. As long as the observer somehow behind the scenes measuring, doing something, it seems that the blessing disappears. Now we have a collapse. Let me give you one more example here. And this is what gave rise to Einstein's comment about spooky action at a distance. And he didn't want to accept this, and he tried to disprove what I'm about to tell you. And it turns out it was one of his big mistakes in his life. It was the Einstein-Podolsky-Rosen paper that was disputed by John Wheeler with an experiment that actually turned out to be true. And it turns out that Einstein was wrong about one thing at least. And entanglement is very interesting. You can take two particles and entangle them in such a way so they are joined at the hip. It's like a yin and a yang, so that if I do something like measure an aspect of the particle, like its momentum or its velocity or its spin, that's the more common way to find which way is it spinning, up or down, left or right, that the other particle automatically at that moment snaps into place in equal and opposite way. If this spin is up, they say Alice's spin is measured down, then Bob's spin will at that moment be measured up. And the interesting thing is this happens it happens to be true no matter where Bob is in relation to Alice. Bob could be next door, or he could be millions of miles away. Faster than the speed of light, the message gets to Bob that he now needs to snap into place. That's spooky action at a distance. It didn't make any sense that it should be able to communicate. And in fact, I don't think they are communicating. I think they are linked. It doesn't surprise us from a Jewish perspective that all matter is somehow linked in some way, because after all, everything came from one, which was God, that gave rise to multiplicity and division, which let's spend a little bit more time about that. That's called particle entanglement. I only bring these up because these are significant to change your view of reality, to understand that at a fundamental level, reality is not what you think. That seeing, in fact, creates a reality. I have oversimplified this dramatically. Sean Carroll, who is really a wonderful lecturer, does not believe, he's an atheist, doesn't believe in God, but he's open to the possibility. He has some great YouTube videos online where he goes into the math behind all of this. Some of it's understandable, some of it's over my head, at least currently. Okay. I think there's one thing that I want to bring to heart before we get back to Torah. And that's and we've only been doing this for 4 minutes, so I've got another minute here on science. There are basically two different interpretations of this phenomena. It's called the uncertainty principle. And one interpretation is from Niels Bohr's school in Copenhagen. They call it the Copenhagen interpretation. And it is what is in the textbooks today, which says really consciousness affects reality, that the wave function doesn't collapse to a particle until there is a conscious observer or some sort of measurement that actually fixes the particle. This is subjective. It is random. It shows probability. That's what Einstein said. God does not play dice. And Bohr said, stop telling God what to do. That's the reason that you saw that quote from before. The other interpretation is called the many worlds interpretation. And that interpretation is essentially possible to believe in a godless universe. It says that actually any point has infinite possibilities. And when you measure that point, you have fixed it for one possibility, but the other possibilities do exist in an infinite number of worlds, the many worlds. It's just that we see it here because that's where we are. The kasha to the many worlds view from our perspective is, well, and many scientists say this, but we're only experiencing one world. What about the other worlds that we're not in? Some people would say, well, we are in those worlds too. We're just not linked to it. I find that a little bit hard to believe, but okay. That's how it can be viewed. And if you spend some time and look at the debate amongst the different metaphysical scientific philosophers and physical philosophers and scientific physicists, you seem to find a line in the sand. Those who want to reject religion or the religion of their childhood, I don't want to go into specifics. Even Jewish folks have a 13-year-old childhood education, and they don't understand the richness of our Torah tradition. They want to reject it too because it doesn't make sense to them. They are more in line or likely to adopt the many worlds view. I could give you many names in that world without denigrating anybody. I'd rather not. And those who are more inclined to accept perhaps a greater reality, a cosmic reality, some metaphysical reality with a higher reality, they are more inclined to accept the Copenhagen view. The Torah approach would be, of course, that the soul, which is a non-scientific way that we might talk about consciousness. So let's demystify it. For now, let's call it this conscious thing that we call a soul, is really the essential creation, and it's the bridge between materiality and spirituality. It is spiritual locked in the physical world. So it wouldn't be surprising that it's the consciousness or the soul that actually creates reality. And in fact, that is the Kabbalistic approach, that the soul creates reality. It's just interesting that science is approaching religion, but many scientists are afraid of religion if they only knew. Some of this stuff isn't taught publicly, so it's hard really to break through. All right, now let's move back to Torah. I'm going to throw up here a chart that we're going to come back to in a second. And I want to get into the counting to 50, which is, as we said before, maybe counting to 50 is the sort of anti-fixed view because we don't actually count 50. It's like we count up to 50, but we don't get to 50. What else does that sound like? That's like when we get to the Jubilee year, we don't actually count the 50th year. Or, when we go 39 lashes, 40 lashes, we don't count the 40th. We only count 39. It's not unlike us to do something like that. But let's digress for a second and let's look at the Exodus story for a minute. The Jews left Egypt in a hurry because they, as we were taught, on the 49th level of impurity. And God had to remove us before he dropped all the way down and we were unredeemable. That would have been not cool. So he chose to lead us out of Egypt quickly, but he didn't lead us too quickly back to Israel because he thought the Jews might be afraid of warring tribes and they wouldn't be able to stand it and they want to go back. Now, let me ask you a question. If we were on the 49th level of impurity, why do we not count like 98 days, 49, 48, 47, get to 0, and then count 49 or 50 up to the top? And that is because that's a misconception of what the 49th level of impurity is. The real meaning of the levels of impurity are that we are steeped so low from the 50th level let's say we're down to 1, that we got a bunch of dirt and grime all over us. And what does that dirt and grime do? It prevents us from being able to see clearly, literally. Meaning, what did Eve do? She saw with her eyes the fruit was desirous. She saw it the wrong way. She wasn't supposed to see it that way. We've been trying to fix seeing ever since then. We have to see things. I've got to admit somebody here. Let's do that. Hello, Mr. Karsh. How are you? We have to see correctly. So these dusty things, and we'll come to these terms in a minute, are called klipot or tuma, impurities, coverings, things that get in the way of us seeing clearly. And what they also do is they mean we lose the connection. We are loosening we used that word before, shefa. Let's think of shefa instead of a spiritual flow. Let's think of it as a current, like an electric current. And there's a wire that we have some help in bridging the gap or tying together. It's not so sharp anymore. It's rusty, or there's some breaks in it. So we're not getting that flow. And let's also keep in mind that the sages did not have the benefit of understanding these scientific terms that we use today, like electric current. This is well before. If they had that idea, maybe this would be a little bit more understandable to everybody today and a little bit more accessible. Now, I would like to try to do something is to demystify a little bit of these charts, because this is actually, people talk about mysticism, and those who know me know I don't like the word. I don't like the term mysticism. I don't like the word angel. I don't like to think or talk in terms that detract or pull people away from reality. Mystical means not reality, they would say. So this is not mystical. What we're talking about we're going to talk about the building blocks of the universe. And when I first saw Rabbi Silverman, I think if he's still on, I don't have the ability to tell who is on here anymore. See if I can just do that. I don't think so.
I am here still. David, I am here.
Okay, well, he mentioned something about the letters or something being the building blocks of creation. Or I heard it somewhere with him. And I thought, well, that's very interesting. I had always felt that there might be something more to this. And it was something I was inclined to look into anyway. And so that is our view, that the letters of the Hebrew alphabet are in fact the building blocks of creation. In fact, God speaks and he creates. And we think of that as, well, that's kind of cute. But actually, it's a much more deeper, significant thing. The Hebrew letters, they have a form, they have a shape. There's a bet, there's a chaf, and there's aleph. It's got a yud above and a yud below and a above in between, and it equals this and that. I don't want to get into all that kind of stuff. But they have form. They also have sound. In fact, the Hebrew letters would go from the most spiritual on the right side, of course, to the less spiritual on the left side. And aleph is so spiritual, it doesn't have a sound. It's just up. And these letters, vowels can inhabit them, and they have sounds of their own. They duh, duh. In fact, there's 5 different places in the mouth that sounds are made of. There's 5 different groupings of sounds. They come into words. They have cantillation marks that in Hebrew are called tam, which also means meaning. Words create meaning, and words come together and form sentences and concepts. So God speaks and he creates the world. That's abracadabra. That's what abarakadabra. That's what it means. So Disney had it right. We just didn't know. He wasn't a wizard in a little mouse outfit sweeping. This was something much deeper. They got it from somewhere else. And one of the first creations, in fact, Vayihi, let there be light. It's very fascinating. Of the very beginning thing, we use this thing that's kind of physical, or the least, it's almost the least physical thing that's physical. It's like made of photons that have no weight, and they travel the speed of light. And nothing can travel the speed of light except light. We'll come back to that. It's interesting. So one of the things that, and I know my children are on and they don't like gematrias, and I think it's sometimes people think gematria is like a cute little thing. There's many, many types of gematrias brought down in the sources. One of them is just take the measure of the letters and they each have a value. So two different words that have the same gematria, maybe they have something uniquely similar, because this goes back to a higher plane. A number can devolve into two numbers, like everything started with one and it devolves into two, into four, into whatever. So you get two words that might have like yin and yang, have the same numerical value, like Nachash, the snake, and Mashiach. The Nachash is the problem, the Mashiach is the cure. So they're kind of related. They have the same gematria. But that's a small point. I don't want to delve on that. But the word Mida, I do want to delve on because it has a gematria of 49. Mem Dalet Hey. Mem is 40, Dalet is 4, Hey is 5. That's 49. And what we do when we count to 50 is we go above measure. We're one above Mida. It's fascinating how the language does that. And when we go into the 50th level, which has a gematria of the word kol, all, everything. It encompasses everything. Jacob had everything. Esau had a lot, Rav, but Jacob had kol. He had everything. He was at that level. So how many times is the Exodus of Egypt mentioned in the Torah? It's mentioned 50 times. What a coincidence. It's fascinating. And what are we doing now? We're counting towards 50. Okay. Now let's look at the chart. Here we are. This is the chart. And these are in your Sidurs. And there's two things here. One is, you see we're counting weeks. And you've got here these references to the Sphirot. Chesed is the fourth, the fifth Sphirot, sixth, all the way down. And then each week has its own Sphirot. So you're counting Sphiros within Sphiros. And the reason you're doing that, that's why we're counting sevens and we're counting days as well, because each day has its own formula. Let's go back and focus on formula. It's like we've got one of one, we've got two of one, we've got three of one. Or the Kabbalistic way they say, we've got Tiferes that's within Chesed, Netzach that's within Chesed, Hod that's within Chesed. That's because each Sephirot is made up of all the other Sephirot, which is made up of all the other Sephirot. It's like gets down to DNA. Why is DNA? Because it follows this system that's higher. The physical world reflects what's going on up there. We get to a code. It's like a formula. So we've got 7 of 7. That adds up to 49. So what happens when we get past that? Well, we're now past that. What's next? Well, let's get to that. Now, here's another thing. I want you to, I brought this out at the beginning. I want you to, if you look in your prayer book, you may not say this. I don't think it's a requirement to say this, but it says for the sake of the unity, the holy unity, may he, blessed be he, may his Shekhinah in fear and in love be unified, this name, the Yud, with the Hey in one, and it's the Yud and the Hey and the Vav and the Hey in one perfect unity. We say that. So we're somehow doing something called unification of a name, a Yud and a Hey, and a Vav and a Hey, which we don't want to say it. I'm going to turn the page now. And this gets into some more diagrams. And I've made this very simple. And if you see right here, there's a disclaimer at the top. This is an oversimplification. It's useful only for describing our program. I wouldn't use this for any other purpose. There's many things that are not in here, but it's going to be useful for us understanding the diagram. So let's look at the left. This is, again, that Kabbalistic tree. And what I've done is I've color-coded it for you. At the top, it's dark blue, always blue. I want to use blue for our Torah stuff. And at the bottom, it's light blue, because these are the upper three. Number 1, Keter, 2, Chachma, 3, Bina. Bina is the one we really want to focus on. And then the bottom ones, there's the Chesed, Gevur, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, and Malchus. And you'll see, this is the very bottom one. This is the physical world right down here. All these others are on a spiritual plane, reflected down here in the physical world too. And then these up here are completely concealed. We don't see them. That's why we always have 10, but 7. There's 10, but 3 of them don't get expressed physically in a way that we can relate. I could tell you more about that. Of course, we don't have time. So that's why we're dealing with the revealed 7 of 7, because they're the ones that are revealed, like the 7 days of the week. We sort of recreate that. So what are these Sefiros? In general terms, in essence, I wrote it here for everybody. This is from the Ramchal. He describes it, I think, very well. He says, like when we speak, the words, typo, form and go out into the air. God speaks and he emanates sephiros. So these sephiros are emanations from God. They are not equal to God, but it's like they come from God. So they're part of this fabric of creation. And it's like there's nothing other than God, really, but they're connected to him. You're familiar probably from Nefesh HaChaim, the idea of the glass blower. God blows into the glass and it blows up and he creates this unit, this place for this void to fill. This sounds very mystical, very mystical. But I want to focus on it in a different way. And let's look at the right here. This is, now it looks like the name of God written top to bottom, but it's not. I substituted the hays with the chet so that I wouldn't write his name, its name, God's name. And you notice it looks a little bit like a human being. There's a head, 2 arms, a body, and 2 legs. That's nothing new. But it's elusive. It helps us understand this idea of flow from above to below. We're used to thinking above and below. It's just a simplification. Just a simplification. But just like with our brains, that's sort of like our higher self. That's where the real power is, the thought. And then we've got other parts of the brain that move other parts of the body. Our hands are certainly more able to do things in our body and our legs. That's what the world that God created is based on. It's like a reducing valve. That's what I've written here. It's a reducing valve from infinity and omnipotent through layers of condensate. It gets thicker and thicker. Rabbi Friedman and I went through this and we got to the end of this and we're going to come back and finish up at some point. We got to this idea, it's called Tzimtzum, but really just think of it like we would say a reducing valve or a transformer. You've got transformers on your street, taking a high electric current, it's too hard to run your toaster and reducing it down to something. And these also correspond to different spheros. The top of the Yud corresponds to Chachma, to Keter, that's his yellow line. Barely there. Then inside the brain, inside the head in this Kabbalistic tree, it's Chachma and Bina. And then we get to the bottom ones. We've got, that's wrong. We've got all of these right here from Chesed to Gevura, all the way down to Yesod, correspond to the Vav. Those are 6 zeros, and that's a Vav. It's got 6 numerical value. And then the final Hey goes to Malchus. This red line, which is really part of the Yud, I'm sorry there, goes to Bina. That's a mistake. I need to fix that. Okay, let's get away from that. Now let's get to some of the deeper sources. So what's going on with 50? Let's look at it again. This is the Maharal, and you see the Hebrew at the top, and I've translated it down here at the bottom. It appears that it was impossible to give the Torah except on that day, which is Shavuot, the 50th day. And when they left Egypt, Israel was like a baby out of the mother's womb, born in a body. The Seichel, he calls that the higher self. It does partner and join with the body, but rather it's divided from the body. Therefore, it needed those 50 days to count into the Spirit. And then it gets to the level of the Torah, which is considered, he says, Seichel Nivdal, that's the words that he used. Because the Torah is from the 50th gate, which is separate from man. It's higher than Midah. It's higher than our physical reality. Therefore, counting to 50 is fitting to an elevation to Seichelis. He calls it mind or higher, which is 50, separated from the number that precedes it, which is 49, Midah. Therefore, it's necessary to count to 50, but not including 50, as 50 is not included in the count. Fascinating. That's what's going on. So what is 50? If you go back before, 50 is the Yud and the Hey. I did that right, actually. Hey is Bina, I'm sorry. And the Yud is Chachma. The Yud and the Hey, when you multiply those together, Yud is 10 and Hey is 5. That's 50 because it's like they're each included within each other. It's like the Yud is 10 times within the 5 because everything is sort of like a Russian doll. It's within. That's the 50. It's the level of Bina, which Chachma and Bina, by the way, are never divorced. This is a marriage that never gets separated. They're always together. And in fact, Bina, if you look at the name, it's the Yud and the Hey, and they can give birth to something, a Ben. They give birth to a son, which is the 7th, the 6th that go down here, and the 7th. It's fascinating. That's why 50 is the level that we're going to, because it's higher, and it represents that level of Bina, which is also the level of the Jubilee. Now, originally, the intention was that this particular formula, right here would be perfect and the flow would be exact and would come down. But there were certain things built into creation that made it a little disruptive. Like says at the beginning of the creation story, the earth didn't make fruit trees, it made trees bearing fruit. There's a little disconnect. And then you got the two great lights, the big light and the little light, another disconnect. Already in creation, there's the ability to mess up. That's free choice. And we messed up. So that's what they call the shattering of the vessels, and the connection isn't very good. So like I said, let's think in terms of science. It's a rusty vessel. It didn't work out so good. So actually, this is the next source I have here. I want to hold on to this one because I want to bring in an in-between source, which is Nesiva Shalom, page 311. It's about the Sefirot HaOmer, and it was too much to print and too much to read. So what I did, I've just summarized some of it for you, and we will definitely finish on time. I want to finish on time. And here's what he said. And he was schooled in some of these deeper ideas. The necessity of counting the Omer is to remove the static, scientific term. And those terms are Tuma and Klipot in Kabbalistic terms. A path back up the ladder. The name is in a state of disconnect, got to reconnect the wire, meaning that the letters and the corresponding sephiros are not properly aligned. Let's fix them. Or they're not connected to provide the correct shefa, electric flow. We reconnect them towards Shavuot. And this is what's called, again, unification of the divine name. That's what we're doing. We're reconnecting the Yud and the Hey with the Vav and the Hey. We're reconnecting the top with the bottom, the mind with the body, so to speak, in the physical world. That's our goal. That's what we're trying to do. So he says, interesting, Shavuot is not given on a specific date. All the other holidays, the 15th of Nisan, the 1st of Tishrei, all of them have a day. Shavuot just says, no, it's on the 50th day after you count. That's Shavuot. Another idea, it's like, it's ethereal. It doesn't even have a physical mitzvah. That's like Shmini Atzeret on the other side. It says the purpose of counting the Omer is to purify us from Klipot and Tuma, following which we are brought into a source of Kedusha, to Bina. In other words, we're reconnecting to that higher. The reason the Torah mentions, now this is interesting for all of you people who say 1/5 of the Jews died on the way out of Egypt. I'm not disputing that. Josh, my son, and I, we did the math. And I told Rabbi Zalman, one of my great teachers, it's possible that a fifth, you could do 4/5, died. You can do the math just from 70 multiplied, 4/5 died. But here's another reason. The reason the Torah mentions the exodus of Egypt 50 times is because the initial exodus is just a start. We need to go out of Egypt a total of 50 times to reach the level of purity, to get to Kedusha. On leaving Egypt, they were 1/50th towards perfection. The counting of the Omer is a continuation of the original Exodus. It's necessary to free us from the Tuma of Egypt. That's why it says they went out chamushim. This is Nesiva Shalom. They went out chamushim, allusion to the 1/50th of what they needed to be at Sinai. That makes sense to me. I like that. Rashi, of course, says it's armed, meaning they were armed with the Kedusha that they had from Passover. They had an impression of it. That's called a Reshima. It left its impression. And then from that impression, it's like the first tablets left their impression on the second tablets. Now we can build our way back to what it could have been. And then the Nesiva Shalom quotes Rabbi Chaim Vital, purification of the Midos is an aspect of becoming a chariot for receiving the Torah. Because if a Jew has not purified his attributes, he's not able to receive the Torah. So it's interesting. Maybe we should be spending our time, instead of just counting, figuring out what we need to be doing, like Rabbi Silverman was talking about before. Each day, we should be thinking about how we need to be more purified. Okay, now let's go to the next source, which is the Zohar. Now, I ran into this during Parshas Emor. I like to read the Zohar on Shabbat. Beautiful elucidation in this particular version. I have Matok Davash. Again, Rabbi Zalman showed me that. And it says, you shall count from the day after the Sabbath this commandment is to count the Sephirot of the Omer. Let's go back over to this page. This mitzvah has already been explained, and the sod, or the secret of this mitzvah, is that all Israel was purified by the Passover offering. That's a beginning, and the tumah had gone out. At least the grip of it had gone out. They weren't elevated and completed to completion. They were not meritorious as was fitting. Since we don't sing full Hallel on Passover, we only sing partial Hallel. That's why, according to the Zohar. 50 days of Tahara to get to the sod, the secret of the world to come, which is Bina, getting into that 50th level. Again, try to demystify. We're trying to get to Bina, which is reconnecting to the higher source. And then we can receive the Torah. It's like a wife and bring the wife to the husband. Unify the upper part of the name with the lower part of the name. Unification of the name. So we count 50, but it's only 49 because we're not going to count above measure. It's above measure. We don't have to count it. So you might say 50 days are really just 49, but no, that's not really true because, excuse me, 50 days are not really 49 or just 49 days. One of these days is very high and is hidden from the world, in which is our world, which is the bottom one. Our world rests in Malchus, because once we unify the name, the flow, the Shefa again, from Bava Metzia that Rashi quoted, can occur. And then on the 50th day, the higher flow is revealed. That's all, I don't like the Kabbalistic terms. Let's move on for that. Okay, now, I had a conclusion, which we're going to come to in a minute, and I don't want to go over. And then this Shabbos, I decided to just pick up the Shabbat on Bamidbar, this week's Parsha, because there's a lot of counting in it. And lo and behold, look what I found. It says, because remember, we're talking about two types of counting. The counting before that was bad because we fix it. We locate things, we locate particles, and now counting to get to a higher level. He says here, no, there are two types of counting. Counting matters of this world, which are material, and this counting, which is not good, because counting each particular piece by itself separates it and is no longer joined and united, creating differentiation. We're no longer united to the whole. The wave function has disappeared. And also counting teaches that there is an end and a finality. Even if you count the sand in the sea, hello, Avraham, hello, Avraham. Even if you count the sea, in any case, there's a finite number. You can count the sands in the sea. It's still a finite number. But on the other hand, counting matters for comprehension of the world to come. This is counting without number, and there is no end or limit to it. Fascinating. That's one of those hand of God things. I wasn't looking for that. I just found it. It was perfect. Okay. Now, if I could just stop sharing my screen. It doesn't seem like I'm able to do that. So I'll just go back to that and you can look at that. Oh, here we go. There we go. Thank you. Let's close that. Okay, very good. All right, let's come to the conclusion. I'm going to tell you one thing without the source, but it's fascinating. And this is from the Ari. It's in Eitz Chaim. And the Ari teaches us that each of the senses has a certain level. Hearing is the level of Bina, but sight is the level of Chachma. It's higher than hearing. And he says that sight creates the vessels for the Shefa. Interesting that sight creates the particle or the physical thing similarly that the flow can come into. But it's like a two-way street. If your eyes are cloudy, you can't see well, then what are you going to see? It's like Eve. She saw the apple. She desired it. She seized it for the wrong purpose. If you see correctly, though, maybe you will create a new reality. Like Jacob was in the center. The angels went up and down. There's a two-way street. So this is the fascinating part. Measuring, seeing, counting is as much impacted down here by what influences us at the time that we see it. If we're full of materialism, or they might say klipot or tuma, egoism, lust, idol worship, then what we see will reflect that environment. But if, on the other hand, if we are elevated and we see clearly, then what happens? We see the thunder. The Jews saw a physical thing, thunder, which is created from sound waves hitting the ear, They could see it correctly and know that it was God-given. And what all is light anyway? Light is something that is beyond physical. If you were, and this is Einstein, this is why we call it counting beyond measure, going to infinity at the speed of light. If you could go the speed of light, the reality is, this is physical reality, nothing made up here, you would be in a dimensionless world. You could go from point A to point B in an instant, no passage of time and no passage. It's almost like the world to come. It's like you're not in physical world anymore. So that's why light also is a beautiful analogy for the first creation. It's a bridge between something that's not physical. So if you want to see when materialized, then you fix things, you limit it, you take away the ability for blessing. But if you want to fix it in another way, like cleanse it, then you get to a higher dimension and you can see reality as it really is. That's my summation. Any questions? Couldn't begin to answer any. Cannot hear you, sir.
I have to unmute myself.
Right.
And I want to offer a collective wow on
Yes.
behalf of everyone. Like, wow. That's right. That's right. Wow.
You have to see the sources. I came up with nothing. And in fact, the conclusion I came up with, the Shalah had come up with a long time ago.
Great. Wow. And especially what you've done for us with the 48th day of the Omer. So we're, you know, this is talk about appropriate. It couldn't have been more like right on than right now. So it's been
Can I yield my time to David?
I'm done.
Oh, you're done.
Yeah, who, Shemaiah Friedman again? Yeah. Okay. No, David can't go beyond. You know, his whole thing is to
Try 50 minutes.
go beyond, right?
I've already said a blessing, just so you know.
Okay. So Yasher Kayach.
Okay, thank you, sirs.
Thank you. It's wonderful to have you. I'm going to take away your
Thank you, David.
this, and I'm also going to take back the spotlight for a minute, and I'm going to do that. And before David goes away, or maybe he's going to stick around and listen to Rabbi New. So David, we have some Russell Feiner and Terry Schultz made donations in honor of your talk tonight, which is really nice. And well, Rabbi Silverman also made a donation, as we all saw him hold up a little sign. And thank you to Stephen Banielinoff, who made a donation, and to my dear brother and sister-in-law in Baltimore, made a donation. So I am told that at this point we are $3,250 away from $30,000, which is fantastic.